I still remember the exact morning when I realized I had become invisible in the company I helped build. The kind of realization that doesn't arrive with drama but with a quiet, humiliating clarity. The kind that makes your stomach sink as you stare at your reflection in a glass office wall and wonder how you let this happen. Because for 5 years I had been the first one in and the last one out. The employee who fixed problems before they became crises. The one clients trusted. The one my boss leaned on when deadlines were impossible and expectations were unrealistic. And back then, he called me his right hand, his future leader. The proof that loyalty still meant something in a ruthless industry. And I believed him because I wanted to believe that hard work would eventually be enough. That if I sacrificed weekends and relationships and sleep, if I answered emails at midnight and took calls on holidays, it would all add up to security and respect. But what I didn't understand then was that to people like him, loyalty is not a value, it's a resource. Something to be extracted until there is nothing left, and I didn't notice the shift at first, because it happened slowly, almost politely, the praise becoming rarer, the meetings I used to lead being reassigned, my name quietly removed from emails where decisions were made, and every time I felt the unease rise, I told myself I was over, because that's what good employees do. They doubt themselves before they doubt authority. They internalize discomfort and call it professionalism. And the day that changed everything started like any other, with a calendar full of meetings and a head full of plans. Except when I walked into the conference room. My boss didn't look up, he just gestured for me to sit. And for the first time in years, he introduced a project I had designed from scratch, as if it belonged to him. Using my ideas, my language, even my data. While I sat there smiling tightly, clapping when everyone else did, feeling something crack inside me as I realized this wasn't an accident. It was a pattern. And when the meeting ended and people congratulated him, he accepted it without hesitation, without even glancing in my direction. And in that moment, I understood that I had crossed from being valued to being useful, and usefulness has an expiration date. Because the same boss who once told me I was irreplaceable now avoided eye contact, now delegated my responsibilities without explanation, now spoke about the future of the team as if I wasn't in the room. And the worst part wasn't the work, it was the gasp. The way he smiled and said everything was fine when I asked for clarity. The way he framed my concerns as insecurity. The way he hinted that if I couldn't handle pressure, maybe leadership wasn't for me. And I swallowed it because I needed the job, because my visa depended on it, because my rent didn't care about my dignity, and months passed like this, with me doing the heavy lifting and him taking the credit, until the day he called me into his office and closed the door. The kind of gesture that makes your heart race before a word is spoken, and he told me, in that calm corporate voice perfected in boardrooms and business schools, that the company was restructuring, that my role was being reevaluated, that my contributions were appreciated but the direction was changing. And as he spoke, I noticed how prepared he was, the documents neatly stacked, the legal language polished, the decision already made. And when I asked what this meant for me, he leaned back and said something that still echoes in my head. He said sometimes people are great for a phase, but phases end. And just like that, years of loyalty were reduced to a season, a temporary convenience. And I walked out of that office feeling hollow, not fired, not yet, but stripped of authority, sidelined, placed on what I would later understand was a slow exit ramp designed to make me quit quietly, without severance, without conflict, without noise, and I might have, if something inside me hadn't finally snapped, because that night I sat in my apartment, staring at the city lights, replaying every compromise I had made, every time I had stayed silent, every warning sign I had ignored, and I realized that if I walked away now, the story would end exactly the way he wanted it to, with me disappearing and him continuing unchanged. And I wasn't angry anymore, I was clear, because clarity is more dangerous than anger, and I decided that if I was going to leave, I would leave on my terms, with the truth intact, and that meant documenting everything. Every email where he reassigned my work without credit, every message where he pressured me to deliver impossible results, every presentation where my contributions were erased. And as I started pulling files and timelines together, something unexpected happened. Patterns emerged that went beyond me, patterns of others who had come before, people whose names were spoken in hushed tones, former employees who had moved on under similar circumstances. And I reached out quietly, carefully, not to complain but to listen. And what I heard confirmed my suspicions, the same playbook used again and again: overwork, isolate, discredit, discard. And as this realization settled in, I knew that what I was dealing with wasn't just personal betrayal, it was systemic exploitation. the kind that thrives on silence and fear. And suddenly the industry I worked in, the one celebrated for innovation and leadership, looked different. Its success built on the quiet burnout of people like me. And I understood then why he was so confident. Why he assumed I would fade away. Because most people do. They protect their future by sacrificing the truth. And I stood at a crossroads, between survival and integrity, knowing that choosing integrity would come at a cost, but also knowing that continuing to stay silent would cost me something far greater. And as the weeks went on, the pressure intensified. Deadlines without authority, expectations without support, subtle comments about my attitude. And then came the final insult, when he announced a new leadership role, using my strategy, my roadmap, my vision, and gave it to someone else, someone loyal to him, someone who would never question where the ideas came from. And as the applause filled the room, I didn't feel anger anymore. I felt resolve, because I finally saw the entire board, and I knew my next move wouldn't be emotional or impulsive, it would be precise, because when someone uses you and discards you, they expect you to break quietly. What they don't expect is for you to learn, to prepare, and to wait for the exact moment when walking away becomes the loudest statement of all. The moment I decided not to disappear quietly, everything about how I showed up changed, not outwardly but internally, because I understood that survival in an unfair system requires strategy, not rebellion. And so I became patient in a way my boss could never read. I continued delivering results, hitting deadlines, solving crises, but this time every contribution was tracked, time-stamped, archived, not with bitterness, but with intention, because I knew that truth without proof is just noise, and I was done being noise. I was watching carefully now, noticing how decisions were made behind closed doors, how credit flowed upward and blame flowed downward, how fear was disguised as company culture and loyalty was framed as silence. And while he believed I was still trying to prove myself, I was actually building leverage, connecting dots across departments, understanding the politics of leadership, identifying who benefited from his narrative and who quietly suffered under it. And in that process I learned something critical. My boss wasn't powerful because he was brilliant. He was powerful because he controlled information, because he spoke first, because he framed the story before anyone else had the chance. And once I understood that, I knew exactly where the real battlefield was. Not in meetings or performance reviews, but in perception. Because in our industry, perception is currency, reputation is leverage, and silence is surrender. And the opportunity I had been waiting for arrived, disguised as a crisis. A major client threatening to walk away. A deal worth millions suddenly on the brink because of decisions made without proper execution. Decisions he had approved but never documented. And when panic spread through leadership, he did what he always did. He delegated the rescue to me. Late nights, urgent calls, impossible timelines. Except this time, I didn't push back. I accepted calmly, knowing this was the moment everything converged. Because as I worked to stabilize the client, I communicated directly, transparently, professionally, building trust not just with solutions but with honesty. And for the first time the client saw the difference between the face of the company and the hands actually holding it together. And when the crisis was resolved, when the contract was saved, when relief swept through the executive floor, my boss stepped forward as expected, ready to take the credit. Except the narrative had already shifted, because the client sent a message copying senior leadership, naming me specifically, thanking me for leadership, clarity, and accountability during the most critical moment of the partnership. And that email landed like a quiet explosion, because it contradicted everything he had been positioning behind the scenes. And I watched his smile tighten as he realized control was slipping. And from that moment on, things escalated quickly. Subtle hostility replaced polite distance. Meetings became confrontational. My decisions questioned publicly. My tone labeled aggressive, while his was called decisive. And I understood this phase well. It was retaliation, the system correcting a perceived threat. And when HR was suddenly involved, when concerns about fit and alignment were raised, I wasn't surprised, because this too was part of the pattern one had studied, the slow build toward character assassination. And yet, instead of defending myself emotionally, I responded methodically. Facts only, documentation only, timelines only. And that restraint confused them, because they expected guilt or fear, not confidence. And behind the scenes I made my next move, not by exposing him directly, not by launching accusations, but by doing something far more dangerous. I made myself visible to the industry, speaking at events, publishing insights, contributing thought leadership under my own name, positioning myself not as a victim but as a professional authority. And slowly, quietly, my reputation began to extend beyond the walls of that company. Recruiters reached out, competitors listened, partners noticed, and my boss noticed too, because nothing threatens insecure leadership like independence. And the tension peaked the day he finally said it out loud, sitting across from me with that same calm voice, telling me that perhaps my future would be better served elsewhere, that the company needed people who were aligned, loyal, grateful, and as he spoke, I realized he still believed he was in control, that I would negotiate, plead, bargain for a graceful exit, and I let him finish, let the silence stretch. And then I said something he wasn't prepared for. I said, I agreed, that I had been thinking the same thing, and in that moment I saw confusion flicker across his face, because he had expected resistance, not readiness, and as I stood up and walked out of his office, I knew the next step would define everything, because leaving wasn't enough, walking away wasn't the shock. What mattered was how the story would be told once I was gone, and whether the industry would see another quiet exit or something it couldn't ignore. The moment I left his office, a sense of clarity replaced all the confusion and fear I had carried for months, because I knew the story wouldn't end with a resignation letter or a quiet departure. And over the next weeks, I executed a plan I had crafted meticulously, reaching out to industry leaders, sharing insights, giving interviews, contributing to publications, all while maintaining professionalism, never a word of bitterness, only the evidence of competence and results. And soon the recognition I had been denied internally started to accumulate externally. People began contacting me for collaborations, companies expressed interest in my skills, and the very clients who had once been distant now sought my perspective, valuing the person they had seen lead under pressure rather than the manager who claimed credit. And as my professional reputation flourished, the company that discarded me began to feel the ripple effects. Projects stalled because leadership lacked the expertise I had quietly demonstrated. Internal morale dipped as colleagues realized the difference between promises and execution. And even my former boss faced scrutiny, questions about oversight, decisions, and accountability that he could no longer control. And while this unfolded, I stayed focused on my own growth, negotiating new opportunities with confidence, refusing to compromise my principles, because I had learned that leverage comes not from anger but from credibility, from demonstrated skill, from being unassailable in your domain. And when the right offer came, one that reflected both my talent and my worth, I didn't hesitate. I moved on not with vindictiveness but with dignity, leaving behind the company that misused me. And in doing so, I discovered something profound. That being discarded is not an end, but a signal to step into your own power, to claim space that was always yours. And the industry took notice, because stories of quiet perseverance, strategic brilliance, and ultimate justice resonate, because people recognize authenticity and resilience. And the final moment of closure came not with confrontation but with reflection, when I realized that the very betrayal that once felt like the worst punishment had become the catalyst for transformation. And I smiled, knowing that I had been both patient and fierce, that I had turned exploitation into opportunity, and that my journey had not only changed my career but my understanding of value, trust, and power. And as I looked back, I understood the full arc, from being used and discarded to becoming undeniable, respected, and free. And nothing felt sweeter than knowing that the story ended on my terms, a testament to the strength of strategy, resilience, and the refusal to let others define your worth. Even after securing my independence and watching my career take flight in ways I had only dreamed of while trapped under his shadow, I realized that the most profound victory wasn't measured in promotions, contracts, or public recognition. It was measured in the quiet confidence that I had cultivated, the kind that allows you to walk into any room without fear, because I had learned how to control the narrative, how to turn adversity into opportunity. And I decided to take this further, not out of revenge but to redefine what power looked like in my world. So I began mentoring others who had been quietly exploited, sharing strategies for navigating toxic leadership, teaching them how to document, how to communicate effectively, how to position themselves for growth even when their contributions were invisible. And in doing so, I created a network of professionals who were resilient, informed, and unafraid to claim their worth. And the ripple effect was astonishing, because suddenly the industry wasn't just watching me succeed, it was seeing a movement, a wave of formerly overlooked talent gaining recognition, taking leadership roles, building influence, and challenging the old ways without needing to tear anyone down. And while I could have remained behind the scenes, I chose visibility, giving talks, sharing insights, collaborating on high-profile projects. demonstrating that the most effective response to being used and discarded is not vengeance but empowerment. And as this momentum grew, former colleagues reached out to thank me, to share their own stories, to say that seeing someone survive and thrive inspired them to reclaim their own paths. And it wasn't lost on me that my former boss, once so confident in his ability to control and discard, now found himself in meetings where his influence was questioned, where decisions were challenged, and where the very culture he had relied on for dominance was shifting, because people had learned to speak, to protect their work, to demand accountability. And I watched it unfold with a sense of calm satisfaction, knowing I had ignited change without stooping to the bitterness that had been expected. And ultimately, the story of being used and discarded evolved into something far larger than personal triumph. It became a blueprint for resilience, leadership, and transformation, a testament to what happens when you refuse to let exploitation define you, when you reclaim your narrative, when you help others rise while rising yourself. And in the final reflection, I understood that the real industry shock wasn't my departure. It was the fact that I had turned every act of betrayal into a force that empowered not only me but countless others, leaving behind a legacy of strength, integrity, and undeniable influence.